Afghanistan. And interesting article here from the New York Times that details some things going on with the Kabul airport suicide bombing at the end of the U.S. withdrawal in August. And so it identifies, and I believe this person has actually been identified previously by the U.S. military, but Abdul Rahman al-Laragi as the suicide bomber. This is claimed by the Islamic State, but now we're getting to some details into who al-Lagari is. He was an engineering student and then was arrested in India. And this was in 2017 for planning a bombing in New Delhi. For an unclear reason, I'm not sure. Maybe he's originally from Afghanistan. That wasn't identified anywhere I could see in this article as to what nationality he actually is. But he ends up being transferred to two high security U.S. prisons in Afghanistan. And then he was transferred, I guess, when the U.S. was withdrawing from the prison being under U.S. control to them being under the Afghan government control. And, whenever the Islamic State took over at the end of August, I guess around August 15th, those prisons were largely emptied out. According to this report, when the Taliban took over, there's about 12,000 prisoners. They killed one of the leaders of the Islamic State Khorasan province that's in the prison, and then release everybody else, which they say are 6,000 Taliban and 1,800 ISIS KP fighters. Not sure exactly how accurate those numbers are, or if I looked for like maybe a Taliban statement, because there wasn't one in this article, to try to explain why they let those people out of the prison, including the Taliban fighters, because even as this article notes that they're releasing people who are a threat to the Taliban. The ISKP is, a bigger threat to the Taliban than anybody else, maybe other than the Pakistani government, maybe the only other, group that really feels an immediate threat from the Islamic State Khorasan province. So interesting how he ends up in Afghanistan and then ends up being released here, but they say it's unclear of how this guy actually got teamed up with ISKP and ended up being the man that carried out this strike or this suicide bombing. But that's what happened. A couple other notes from this article. They say he had a 25-pound bomb on him, or it was a 25-pound bomb. So I think this adds to the suspicion that myself and others have raised about exactly how nearly 200 people end up dead after this suicide bombing. Now, I've talked about how there's a possibility that it may not have been a large number of either U.S. soldiers or U.S. allies, particularly the O1, O2 groups from Afghanistan, the CIA trained commandos that are now reported and confirmed to have been stationed at the types of posts like around and in the Abbey Gate of the Kabul airport where there was reported to be fire coming from. And so it seems likely that not everyone who died either from the suicide bomber or from the effects of that, crowd surges, people, this was happened in a sewage ditch. And so I think there's a possibility, I've even seen some reporting that a few people may have drowned in that sewage ditch, but it does raise some questions with the size of this bomb. Now, the size of the bomb could be a somewhat arbitrary thing depending on how it was developed, but there wasn't anything about this bomb that was identified as being particularly effective or anything different than just some explosives being used. It's unclear, I guess, how much shrapnel or something like that was possibly used within this bomb. So yeah, I think that's most of what's going on with the actual terrorist attack that was reported in this article. It does say that the United States is still trying to gather intelligence on the people who worked with the suicide bomber to get, him to that position, to get a bomb on him, because this did only happen a few days after he was released from the prison. And so, I guess a couple things that, really stick out in my mind are, first of all, does the U.S. really feel that they're competent after their attempted drone strike after the suicide bombing at the Kabul airport here? That was actually the drone strike in Kabul that kills 10 people, including 7 civilians. Do we actually have the intelligence capabilities to identify the people associated with the suicide bomber and take them out in retribution without killing any civilians? And then also, a very obvious point that they apparently can't even get to or hypothesize in this article is the idea that the suicide bomber in the U.S. high security run prisons ends up either, getting more radicalized, or there links up with the people that he eventually carries out this attack with. And, this has obviously been seen in the past in Iraq with like Camp Buka and things like that, Abu Ghraib. And so even al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, who was killed in recent years, was in those prisons. And so I think it could be a situation like that. This article does mention something I haven't seen a lot of reporting in the mainstream media, that for the most part, the Islamic State Khorasan province, ISKP, is a breakoff of the Pakistani Taliban, the Terinke-e-Taliban. And recently, the Terinke-e-Taliban declared an end to a ceasefire they had with the Pakistani government. So this is all happening on the Pakistan side of the border. But you had to wonder if maybe the release of the ISIS members of these prisons has fueled the Islamic State, or the Terinke-e-Taliban, the associated group with the Islamic State Khorasan province in Pakistan, carrying out some new attacks. They killed a Pakistani soldier who was working with, I believe, polio vaccination workers. I know the U.S. has been donating a lot of the Pfizer vaccines to Pakistan, but I'm not sure if they're like distributing them along with the polio stuff at all. I think just this week they announced it was another 5 million doses to Pakistan, bringing the total to 37 million. But along with the attack that targeted the vaccination security guard, there have also been attacks by the Terinke-e-Taliban. One was a suicide attack, and then there was a raid by the Pakistani security forces on a TET position, and that led to, I think, 4 Pakistani forces being killed, and then them capturing one member of the Terinke-e-Taliban. So this fighting is going on in the region, not just in Afghanistan, but I wonder if maybe there's going to be some help for taking on like the Islamic State Khorasan province by the Pakistani government or something like that, seeing that helping them in their fight against their own Taliban. All right. So let's move on and talk about a couple more things dealing with Afghanistan. There's growing pressure within, the U.S. government and everything, and also, former U.S. government officials, military commanders, to do something about the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Last week, 3 former military commanders in Afghanistan and 4 former U.S. ambassadors to Kabul, along with former senior officials, called on the administration to consider relaxing policies that froze the Afghan government's foreign assets and cuts off U.S. financial assistance, along with donor funding, once accounting for 3/4 of the nation's revenue. And so, this isn't like a proposal that necessarily I think they have. They're basically just saying, like, look, this humanitarian crisis is getting so bad. Absolutely, now we have to do something about it. And importantly, this isn't just human rights activists. Again, it's, former military, U.S. government diplomats. These aren't, people who necessarily don't, approve of sanctions. They're fine with them on Iran or things like that, but they understand that these sanctions are going to be counterproductive in just how massive the humanitarian catastrophe in Afghanistan is about to be, this winter that we're already in. There's been an announcement since then. This was on December 22nd. The U.S. authorized certain transactions with the Taliban, but it's kind of unclear if this is going to have any effect, and it's even laid out that way in the Reuters article. The United States formally exempted U.S. and UN officials doing business with the Taliban from U.S. sanctions. And I mean, this is absurd, right? That you're going to sanction a UN official for meeting with the Taliban and having some kind of agreements with the Taliban. This isn't talking about like major aid programs or anything like that. It's just the officials being able to go meet with the Taliban and do that kind of level of business with the Taliban. Unfortunately, we're only talking about really small pots of aid. And what would need to happen is either for the U.S. to allow a large amount of aid into Afghanistan, or for the U.S. to unfreeze the Afghan government accounts and allow the Taliban to have access to that money. Either way, if this is a large scale aid program, like anywhere you carry out large scale aid programs, people who have the monopoly of violence, right? They have they're the controlling government, the militants, whatever they are. They're going to steal some of it, right? That's just a part of it, and taxes apply and everything like that, even if it's aid. And so I'm sure that if the U.S. does allow this money, it may be somewhat of a political loser, because the Republicans are going to cry and scream that, oh my God, some of this money is going to the Taliban, and the Taliban once killed Americans, even though we killed far more, Taliban and everything like that. And unfortunately, the U.S. mainstream media is really covering up what's happening in Afghanistan. This laid out by the great Jim Loeb at Responsible Statecraft, looking into the amount of coverage given by ABC, NBC, and CBS, which are the most watched news programs in the United States. These are the mainstream, not the cable news networks, and they've devoted only 21 minutes combined of the three networks combined on Afghanistan since the end of September. Of course, before that, it was all Afghanistan 24/7, 427 minutes of coverage in the 2 months before that. And it, just goes to show when they could, make the Taliban out to be really bad and this being some kind of crisis and everything like that. Boy, they'll have all the reporters and everything, but when the U.S. is just starving children to death, there's really nothing sensational and exciting about that as far as the news goes, and so they don't even bother to cover it whatsoever. Even more disturbing, it's not like of those 21 minutes is largely coverage of the humanitarian crisis. I think it's about 10 segments total, and only 2 of them are actually dedicated to the humanitarian crisis. He says, moreover, 15 of the 21 minutes devoted to Afghanistan between October 1st and December 25th had nothing to do with the increasingly desperate humanitarian crisis that threatens 23 million people, more than half of the country's population, with extreme levels of hunger, as many as 1 million children with death due to severe acute malnutrition this winter. And so again, the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan is going to be massive. I am hesitant around that 1 million number for children, just because I don't want to sound alarmist. Now, maybe it could be that bad, but I feel like these humanitarian groups tend to overestimate what that number is going to be. But, even if they're overestimating by a factor of 10, I mean, we're still talking about 100,000 Afghan children that are going to starve to death this winter. But not only that, one of the things that's really missed about this is, let's say that one of the reasons I'm hesitant to always use the 1 million number too is because what if it doesn't hit that number, and let's say only 10,000 children starve to death, this winter in Afghanistan, which is absolutely horrific. But if you said 1 million and then it's only 10,000, people think that it's not as serious then. And then in the other part of this too is that even if those other 990,000 children who didn't starve to death live through the winter and everything like that. When you're talking about that serious level of acute malnutrition for all those kids, even if they do survive, these are going to have lifelong impacts on their health and on their mental health and on the Afghan society and culture. I mean, Afghanistan, the U.S. past 4 decades, but particularly the past 2 decades of war in Afghanistan, are going to be a scar on that society that will be remembered into eternity, right? Even if you're talking about, again, if you starve 1 million Afghan children to death, that will be something that will always be remembered in Afghanistan as one of the darkest things to ever happen to those people. I mean, sure that the Soviets killed 1 million people or so during their years long war, but a lot of those people are adults and everything like that. To starve, a huge portion of like the coming Afghan generation to death is huge. But now you're talking about also that all these children suffering this secure malnutrition, all these health problems that they're going to have, all the mental health problems that they're going to develop. There is pretty resounding research in the US on how important it is, for children to have the appropriate amount of like food and nutrients and everything. And maybe it doesn't sound so serious as somebody's just shorter or stunted in certain ways, but you're also talking about increased risk, especially with all the PTSD that's been suffered by the children of Afghanistan over the past 20 years from the U.S. war. With that and the malnutrition, you're talking about, I'm sure, so many more increases, examples of drug use and drug addiction. And so how many of these children, they're not going to starve to death this winter, but because of how their brain develops due to this malnutrition and due to the U.S. warfare over the past 20 years, are going to end up overdosing on an opiate, before they're the age of 20 or something like that, or going to develop more serious mental health problems that could cause them to act violently. And, just an increase in people who act violently whenever you have an increase of people who experience severe acute malnutrition. Malnourished children are more likely to engage in certain crimes and things like that. So, none of this should be surprising that we're, inflicting a multi-generation long problem in Afghanistan that's going to take forever to work out of that society. And, same with the other 2 countries or 3 countries I'm talking about today: Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. A few stories on refugees trying to make it from Afghanistan, or not refugees, I guess, but Afghans trying to get to the United States. There's 60,000 people in Afghanistan who have applied to come to the United States. I believe that includes like interpreters and their families. So it's not 60,000 interpreters and, then their 60,000 wives and their 180,000 children or whatever, but this will be 60,000 people total. And according to the State Department, about 33,000 of those Afghans have passed their initial what they called more onerous vetting requirements and are eligible for evacuation of Afghanistan. Of those people, I believe it is 2.2 thousand who have already gotten out of Afghanistan, and then there are, let's see, I guess another potential like 2,000 or more beyond that 60,000. So a total of 62,000 are believed to be people who worked for the U.S. government and remain in Afghanistan. By the way, it's a little confusing how they write it, because they say, in this Afghan interpreters and other Afghans, it's not clear if, this is just interpreters or other Afghans who worked with the U.S., interpreters or other Afghans, meaning essentially anyone in Afghanistan, or just like the interpreters and their families. So, questions on how these numbers are coming out and everything like that. But it seems like tens of thousands of more Afghans will likely be coming to the U.S. Now, that's through a one program. There's another program that Afghans are trying to use. 35,000 in total have applied to come to the United States through the humanitarian humanitarian parole program. And I guess one issue this program is having is typically it only processes about 2,000 applications a year. And, this year they have multiple times that number. So far, they've denied 740 applications and conditionally approved about 140. Typically, this program only approves about 500. So if you look at those numbers, if it gets approves 25% normally, that's about where it is with the Afghans. So I guess maybe we could expect that to continue, and most of the people who are applying through that program won't make it to the United States. It's now reported that the U.S. carried out 156 airstrikes in Afghanistan in the month of August. That's the last month that the U.S. was in and bombing Afghanistan. At least as of now, the Biden administration says we have these over the horizon capabilities, but currently isn't engaging in drone strikes in Afghanistan. At least as far as been reported anywhere, I haven't even heard the Taliban complain that the U.S. is carrying out drone strikes in Afghanistan. And in fact, it's been since like the end of September that the Taliban even complained that U.S. drones were flying over Afghanistan, although that could still be happening, or the U.S. could be using some kind of other intelligence gathering methods for figuring out what's happening there, although they're probably not doing a very good job anyways. But this was an uptick in airstrikes and was the highest number at August 2021 since October of 2020. Now, I did talk about on the show, and I do think it's the case that I kind of surprised that the U.S. actually didn't carry out more airstrikes in August and really try to pummel the Taliban to at least slow their advance and everything like that, but maybe reading the writing on the wall or whatever, or the airstrikes just being ineffective, led that number to be 150. Interesting op-ed from the Washington Post. Who won Afghanistan? Private contractors. There's nothing in this article that anybody in this listens to the show is going to be surprised about. But the one thing that I thought was worth noting is that this is running in the Wall Street Journal. An article basically saying that the contractors are the only people from benefit from the Afghan war, and they got filthy rich on it. Last story on Afghanistan, this from Business Insider. After taking in Afghan commandos, the UK military may try to build another elite special operations force, and so they want to use the Afghan commandos. I'm guessing these are the guys that were trained by the either US, UK special forces, or maybe even the US CIA. Afghan commandos were known to carry out war crimes in Afghanistan, concerning that the UK is looking to incorporate them in their military. But if the UK is thinking about doing it, I suspect the US is thinking about that possibility as well. And this could be very concerning if the U.S. is using these former commandos to, go around the world and carry out war crimes or something like that.